The chains bit into his wrists with every step, each jolt echoing through his raw nerves. Xander's head throbbed in rhythm with his heartbeat as the Zevari guards dragged him along a corridor that looked like something out of a fever dream. The palace wasn't built. It had been sculpted from some living material that shimmered like emerald and bled gold in the soft glow of hovering light orbs. The vaulted ceiling soared so high it seemed to scrape the sky itself, and every inch of it pulsed faintly, as though the palace were alive and watching. "Move faster, human," one guard hissed, talon-like fingers digging into his arm hard enough to draw blood. Xander coughed a dry laugh, his voice ragged from 3 days of dehydration. "I'd love to," he rasped, "but your hospitality's been less than inspiring." The guard slammed a scaled fist into his ribs. Pain flared, but Xander held his ground. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing him crawl. Not now. Not in this place where everything radiated power and danger. The corridor widened into a colossal chamber where light gathered like liquid stars. A throne dominated the far end, a massive structure carved from a single opalescent crystal, glowing faintly as though it held starlight in its core. On that throne sat the figure who had haunted every Zevari intelligence briefing he'd ever read, Queen Velina. His breath caught, just for a moment. The holograms hadn't done her justice. Her skin was deep jade, shimmering with lighter facets like cut gemstone, and her proud, curving horns gleamed with veins of gold. Her violet eyes fixed on him with the intensity of a predator considering whether to kill or toy with its prey. The gown she wore was a thing of impossible grace-liquid silver that flowed over her body before cascading into delicate, translucent folds that pooled at her feet. "Bring him forward," commanded a voice like music laced with steel. The guards shoved him closer until he stood before the dais, chains clinking softly in the vast silence. "Kneel," a towering Zevari in ceremonial armor barked from her right. "Captain Krav," Xander guessed the Queen's personal guard. "I represent Earth," Xander said, his voice steady despite the blood staining his once pristine diplomatic whites. "I'll stand." A ripple of shock passed through the assembled courtiers. Krav's hand went to his blade, but Velina lifted one elegant finger, and the hall fell still. "The human thinks he still has dignity," she said, circling him with slow, deliberate steps. Her scent, a mix of wild jasmine and something darker, brushed his senses, unsettling him in ways he didn't care to name. "Tell me, human, do you know why you're here?" "Because your negotiators don't understand diplomatic immunity," he replied, eyes locked on hers. "Or maybe your empire fears what it doesn't understand." Her hand flashed like a viper, slender fingers closing around his throat with terrifying strength. She lifted him off the ground with ease, her face inches from his. "Your species' arrogance is remarkable," she whispered. So fragile and yet so defiant, Xander's lungs burned. Still, he forced out the words. "If that's what you wanted, I'd already be dead?" Something flickered in her eyes, not mercy, but recognition. She released him, and he dropped to one knee, coughing air back into his lungs. "Perhaps the truth will decide your fate," Velina said. She turned to Krav. "Bring the crown." The hall hushed as the captain approached a pedestal and lifted an object that looked like a circlet of twisted silver-black metal, its surface veined with something faintly luminescent. Xander felt the air change denser, charged. The crown wasn't just an artifact. It was alive in some way he couldn't comprehend. "The sovereign's crown," Velina declared, her voice carrying across the chamber. "It judges truth. It selects the worthy. For 3 centuries, it has chosen no one. Until now, perhaps." The court leaned forward as the crown was raised over Xander's head. He braced for pain, for some alien judgment that would end with his body sprawled on the floor. Instead, the veins of light inside the crown flared soft at first, Then blinding, searing brilliance flooding the hall like a newborn star. Gasps broke from every throat. Krav almost dropped it, his scaled hands trembling. Xander stared, stunned, as the light pulsed stronger, responding to him as if alive, as if calling him. Velina stood frozen, her perfect composure cracking for the first time. Her violet eyes widened in something like fear and fascination. "Impossible," she whispered, the word cutting through the stunned silence. She descended the dais slowly, her gaze never leaving him. Finally, her voice, soft but carrying the weight of history. "The crown has chosen." She stopped inches from him, the glow painting her in silver fire. "You." The hall erupted into chaos as Xander's world tilted on its axis. Cliffhanger. The light still pulsing, the Queen's words echoing in his skull. "It has chosen you." Asterisk Xander's ears still rang with the uproar that followed the crown's blinding glow. Voices crashed over one another in a wave of disbelief and outrage. The Javeri language, spiking with guttural tones and harsh consonants that sounded like weapons. Guards moved forward instinctively, forming a wall between him and the nobles, while Captain Krav gripped his blade with such force that the metal creaked under his claws. High Counselor Zoran was the first to break from the crowd, his horned silhouette sharp against the opalescent floor. His voice cracked like a whip, each word laced with venom. "This is an abomination. 3 centuries of silence broken by a human? A prisoner?" His scales shimmered with fury, the ceremonial gems on his brow vibrating with every syllable. Silence. Velina's voice sliced through the clamor like cold steel. The Queen stood at the base of the dais, her liquid silver gown reflecting the relentless glow of the crown. Its light hadn't dimmed. It pulsed as if in rhythm with Xander's own heartbeat. He wanted to tear his gaze away from it, but something in that glow felt alive, tethering him to a destiny he hadn't asked for. Her violet eyes locked on him, unblinking. The weight of centuries sat in her stare. Then, without warning, she turned on her heel and ascended the steps of her throne with the grace of a blade cutting through air. "The sovereign's crown does not falter," she declared, her voice amplified by the acoustic hum of the vaulted chamber. "It has spoken, and its word is law." The hall fractured into 100 simultaneous protests. Zoran pushed forward. Again, his gold-inlaid horns catching the glow like jagged lightning. "Majesty, you cannot." Velina's gaze speared him mid-sentence. "I can, and I will." She turned back to Xander. "Remove his chains." The guards hesitated. Krav's jaw tightened. "Your Majesty, that was not a request." Her tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. It slid under their skin like venom. Slowly, grudgingly, the shackles fell away. The cold weight lifted from Xander's wrists, leaving angry red grooves that throbbed like open wounds. He flexed, his fingers, aware of every eye on him, hostile, hungry, hateful. "What now?" he asked, his voice hoarse but steady. Velina descended the dais again. The light haloed her horns, crowned her in a radiance older than his entire species. She stopped close enough for him to feel the static crawling over her skin. "Now," she said softly, "you live." A pause, her gaze piercing into his very marrow. "And you learn what it means to be chosen." Before he could answer, the chamber doors slammed open with a sound like a thunderclap. A new wave of nobles surged in, drawn by the commotion. The ripple of voices grew sharper, more dangerous. "The council will never accept this." Someone shouted. "Then the council will learn to kneel," Velina said, her words velvet and venom. She gestured to Krav. "Escort the human to the east wing. He will be treated as the crown commands, with the dignity of a royal consort." That single word consort dropped like a detonation. Gasps choked the air. Xander's pulse roared in his ears. Consort? His mind reeled. What did that even mean in Zavari culture? A diplomatic title? A leash? A death sentence wrapped in silk? Wait, he began, but his protest died as Krav seized his arm, not roughly this time, but firmly, like a man holding back a storm. As the guards led him out, the last thing Xander saw was Velina standing bathed in the crown's impossible glow, her expression carved from stone. But her eyes, those violet, unyielding eyes, held something else now. Not hatred, not pity. Something more dangerous, Dot. Something that made his blood run hot and cold all at once. Outside the chamber, the palace stretched like a dream. He couldn't wake from emerald corridors twisting beneath ceilings of living crystal, walls pulsing faintly with inner light. Every alien ornament seemed to watch him, to whisper that he didn't belong. Krav marched in silence, but Xander caught the tension in his jaw, the almost imperceptible flick of his tail. Finally, Xander broke it. "Consort," he said, tasting the word like poison. "That's your queen's idea of a joke?" Krav didn't look at him. "The crown doesn't joke, human." His voice was low, edged with something like dread. "And for what it's worth, I hope you're stronger than you look." The words chilled Xander more than the dungeon ever had. Because beneath the venom, Krav sounded almost sincere. They stopped before a towering set of doors, inlaid with silver glyphs that shimmered as they approached. The doors parted without a sound, revealing chambers so lavish they belonged in a myth-soaring walls veined with gold, floors of molten glass, a bed carved from a single pearl-like stone. His prison was a palace. As the doors sealed shut behind him, Xander turned in a slow circle, trying to swallow the enormity of what had just happened. The crown had chosen him. The queen had claimed him, Dot, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he wondered if death might have been the simpler fate. Behind him, the crown's glow still burned in his mind's eye-white hot. Unyielding, eternal .*XANDER woke to darkness fractured by shafts of pale green light slipping through the latticework walls. For a brief, blissful second, he forgot where he was. Then memory surged back like a tide chains. The throne room, the impossible blaze of the crown. He swung his legs off the bed, his bare feet sinking into a floor that pulsed faintly with warmth, as though alive. The opulence of the chamber mocked him, velvet draperies that shimmered like liquid emerald, bioluminescent vines curling across the ceiling, a bed carved from pearlstone big enough for a royal harem. This wasn't a cell. It was a gilded cage. The silence pressed on him too deep, too perfect. He'd learned in war zones and negotiation tables alike, silence was never safe. The attack came without warning. A whisper of movement, a flicker of shadow. Then a blade arced down toward his throat with the gleam of a falling star. Instinct roared to life. Xander threw himself sideways, the weapon biting into the headboard with a dull thunk that sprayed shards across the floor. He rolled and came up hard against the wall as his attacker pivoted in a swirl of dark fabric, eyes glowing like molten metal beneath a hood. "Human filth," the assassin hissed, voice serrated with hate. The creature's scaled skin gleamed under ritual paint, its limbs taut with killing intent. Another blade flashed into its clawed hand. "Not exactly the welcome basket I was expecting," Xander muttered, adrenaline slamming through him. His eyes darted, searching there. A heavy decorative urn sat near the balcony arch. He lunged, grabbed it, and hurled it with every ounce of strength left in him. The urn smashed into the assassin's shoulder, staggering him just long enough for Xander to dive for the door. He didn't make it. The panel burst open first, flooding the room with light, and 3 figures stormed in. "Stand down," barked a voice like grinding steel. Captain Krav. 2 guards flanked him, weapons drawn, energy blades humming with lethal intent. The assassin froze, then did the unthinkable. With a guttural snarl, he spun the blade inward and plunged it into his own chest. Xander staggered back, heart pounding as the assassin's body convulsed, scaled lips shaping words wet with blood. For the purity of Zavari blood, he rasped. Then the light drained from his eyes. Silence fell, thick and humming with shock. Krav's face hardened as he stepped over the corpse, his yellow eyes like shards of flint. "Third attempt this week," he growled to the guards. Xander blinked, still catching his breath. "Your security is impressive," he said dryly. "They haven't killed me yet." Krav's jaw flexed. "Her Majesty ordered your safety above all else." His gaze burned like twin suns. "If you die, human, so does the last shred of stability in this empire." The words lingered as the guards dragged the body away, the copper tang of blood tainting the air. Xander stared at the crimson streaks pooling across the flawless pearl floor and realized the truth like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just a prisoner anymore. He was a prize, a symbol, maybe even a prophecy. And symbols had a way of drawing blades dot by the time Krav left, doubling the guards at the door. Xander's pulse still hadn't slowed. He tried to steady his breathing, but his mind spun faster than the moons outside his balcony. Why was he still here? Why hadn't Velina declared this some cosmic error and ended him? Unless the door slid open again. She stepped through like a living storm. Veil, Aina. Gone was the ceremonial gown of liquid silver. In its place, a flowing tunic that shifted color with every movement, catching the green light and spinning it into shades of violet and indigo. Her horns gleamed under the soft glow, and her violet eye stars, he thought, distant and devastating, fixed on him with unreadable intensity. "You survived," she said, her voice smooth as glass, her expression carved from shadow and moonlight. "Barely." Xander replied, his tone edged with something that wasn't quite gratitude. "I'd almost think someone wants me dead." Her lips curved in a razor-thin smile. "Someone always does when power changes hands." She circled him slowly, her presence electric, her scent wild jasmine, laced with spice coiling through his senses. "I didn't ask for this," he said, forcing steel into his voice. "Neither did I." She stopped inches away, her eyes like violet fire. "Yet here we are bound by a relic older than both our civilizations." Her fingers brushed the faint red grooves on his wrists, lingering a fraction longer than necessary. "The crown doesn't choose at random, Xander. It sees potential." Her voice lowered, intimate and dangerous all at once. "The question is, will you rise to it or burn beneath it?" He swallowed, pulse hammering in his ears. "Maybe the better question is, what do you want from me?" The faintest shadow of a smile touched her lips. "Everything," she whispered. Before he could answer, a distant boom rocked the palace. The lights flickered. Somewhere beyond the walls, alarms began to howl. Velina's head snapped toward the sound, her voice slicing the silence like a blade. "Stay here." She turned to go, liquid shadows trailing in her wake. "Not a chance," Xander muttered under his breath, already moving to follow, because whatever storm had just broken inside these walls, it was going to drag him straight into its heart. The corridors of the Zavari palace trembled underfoot as distant booms rolled like thunder through its emerald veins. Xander followed Velina's stride without invitation, her guards scattering to intercept the panic that rippled through the court. His instincts screamed that whatever was happening wasn't random. Power shifts never were. They stopped before. A door framed in silver runes, humming faintly with an energy that prickled his skin. Velina pressed her palm to a glyph. The barrier dissolved like mist. Beyond lay a chamber unlike any Xander had seen, a cathedral of science and secrets. Holographic screens hovered like captive ghosts, streams of alien script dancing across them. At the center stood a pedestal, and on it the sovereign's crown pulsed softly, as if it still breathed his name. A Zavari female stood over the console, her slender fingers flying through a cascade of symbols. Scales rippled along her neck, in shades of indigo as she glanced up, eyes glittering with urgency. "Your Majesty," she said, inclining her head. The crown reacted again, stronger this time. "This is Dr. Everin," Velina said, without looking at Xander. "Our foremost geneticist." Xander folded his arms, masking his unease with sarcasm. "I'm guessing this isn't about picking wedding colors." Everin's crest flicked with annoyance. "You think this is a jest, human? The crown is not a trinket. It was engineered millennia ago, its purpose long debated. But now I have proof." She swept a clawed hand toward the hovering display's dot symbols reformed into spirals, of color DNA sequences twisting like jeweled serpents in the air. 2 distinct strands glowed side by side, one Zavari, elegant and fluid, the other jagged and familiar in its human simplicity. "This is you," Everin said, tapping the second strand. "And this our queen." Her claws danced again, merging the two into a single helix that shimmered with gold light. The crown's function isn't ceremonial. It selects the optimal genetic pairing for the survival and dominance of the royal bloodline. That has always been its true purpose. Xander felt the words strike like a blade. "You're saying it wants us to breed?" "It does not want," Everin snapped. "It calculates." Velina stepped closer to the glowing helix, her violet eyes cold fire. "Continue," she ordered. Everin summoned another projection, a sequence older, darker, marked with warning glyphs. "Centuries ago, during first contact with humans, our ancestors initiated Project Nexus, an experiment to merge Zavari resilience with human adaptability. It failed, or so history claims. The subjects were eradicated. But," she gestured sharply, pulling up another overlay, "the markers persisted, hidden in human bloodlines, until now." Xander stared at the sequence. His sequence. And there it was, a thread of alien light woven into his DNA, dormant for centuries, but undeniable. "You're telling me I'm part Zavari," he said, his voice low. "A fraction," Everin confirmed. "But enough. You carry markers linked to the original royal genome. That is why the crown reacted not merely to you as a human, but to what sleeps inside your cells." The room tilted beneath him. His father's face flashed in his mind, framed by the glow of frontier stars, whispering secrets over archaeological ruins. The ship that vanished when Xander was 15. The questions that never found answers. "My father," he murmured. "He spent years digging on Zavari border worlds. If he found something, then your bloodline was no accident." Velina finished, her voice soft as a knife's edge. Her gaze locked on him, searching, stripping him down to bone and truth. "You are the echo of a union forbidden by both our species." Xander laughed once, harsh and hollow. "So what now? You put me in a lab? Breathe the perfect air?" Velina's eyes flickered, a storm of defiance and duty. "What I do now," she said slowly, "is decide whether to embrace destiny or destroy it." Before Xander could speak, the chamber shuddered violently. Sirens shrieked, harsh and alien. A voice crackled through the convergent panicked. "Council chambers. Breached. Malek's forces armed and advancing." Krav burst through the door, energy blade drawn, his scales glittering with sweat. "Your Majesty, the coup is in motion. We have minutes before they control the palace." Velina turned, her silhouette framed by the pulsing crown. Her voice. "Cold iron. Secure the crown. Evacuate this level." "What about me?" Xander asked, forcing his tone steady as dread coiled like a serpent in his gut dot. Her gaze speared him violet fire. unyielding. "You stay with me," she said. "Alive, you are leverage. Dead, you are a spark for civil war. And right now," she lifted the crown, its brilliance flooding the lab, burning symbols into the walls like prophecy. "We cannot afford either." The doors slammed shut behind them as alarms wailed like funeral bells. And in that moment, Xander understood the truth. The crown hadn't just chosen him. It had marked him throne, blood, war until every star in the galaxy burned. Black. Asterisk, the cell smelled of cold metal and old blood. A single light burned overhead, a pale and unforgiving glow that cast long skeletal shadows across the walls. Xander lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, chains biting into his wrists once more. Funny how things came full circle only this time. The stakes weren't survival alone. They were everything. The coup had been fast, surgical. Malek's forces struck with precision, severing communications, overrunning key guard posts. Loyalists fought back, but by the time Velina and Xander reached the upper corridors, the palace had fractured into chaos. He'd seen the moment the betrayal cut her deeper than any blade, the flicker in her eyes when Malek declared her unfit to rule, citing contamination of royal blood. The words dripped like acid, burning centuries of tradition into a weapon. And now, here they were. Two figures stripped of crowns and titles, caged like animals awaiting slaughter. The door hissed open, spilling a shaft of crimson emergency light across the floor. Velina stumbled inside, flanked by two guards who shoved her forward before sealing the door behind them. She wore no silver, no jewels, only a plain shift that clung to her like mist, the regal poise still in her bones even as a control collar. Encircled her throat, dampening the lethal grace of her abilities. "Velina," Xander said, his voice rough, dragging her name out like an anchor. He pushed himself upright as she sank against the opposite wall, violet eyes hollow with exhaustion. "You should have gone with your people," she murmured. Her voice had lost its blade edge, soft now, fractured. "The rescue fleet, they came for you, didn't they?" Xander gave a bitter laugh. 3 days from now, maybe. They didn't count on palace politics turning into a war zone. She turned her head, the faint glow of her markings catching the light. "You still think like a diplomat." A pause, long enough to weigh eternity. "Malek plans a spectacle at dawn. Your death first, then mine. He'll stream it across the Empire as a warning." Xander felt the weight of the words press like chains on his chest. For a long moment, there was only silence between them, broken by the distant wail of alarms echoing through the palace like mourning cries. Finally, he spoke. "So that's it? We just wait?" Her laugh was low, bitter, laced with something dangerously close to despair. "Waiting was never in your nature." Her gaze locked on his, violet fire flickering through shadows. "Do you regret it?" "Regret what?" he asked softly. Her fingers twitched against the floor, claws scraping faint grooves into the metal. "Everything since the crown chose you." He met her stare, something raw and unguarded in his chest. "I regret nothing." The words came like truth torn from bone. He shifted, chains clinking as he crossed the narrow space between them and crouched in front of her. "Not the dance, not the fight, not this." Her breath hitched, barely audible, but there. Her eyes softened, the storm inside them breaking against unseen shores. "When the crown glowed for you," she whispered, "I thought it was a curse." A tremor in her voice now, fragile as glass. "Now, I think it was a gift." Something in Xander cracked wide open. He reached up, brushing his fingers against her cheek, tracing the intricate patterns of her skin, warm, impossibly smooth. Her breath feathered against his lips as she leaned in, her horns framing his face like a crown forged of shadows and stars. The kiss was a spark in a dry forest sudden, consuming, inevitable. No politics, no tradition. Just the press of two beings clinging to the only certainty left, each other. The chains dug into his wrists, pain blooming like fire, but he didn't care. Not when her hands found his shoulders, pulling him closer. Not when the world beyond their cell dissolved into meaningless static. Time folded, fragile and finite, until nothing existed but heat and breath and the desperate rhythm of hearts refusing to surrender. When they finally broke apart, foreheads touching, their breaths mingling in the cold air, her voice was a whisper against his skin. "If this is our last night, no regrets," he finished for her. His thumb brushed the curve of her jaw, committing every line of her face to memory. None. They stayed like that, tangled in silence and shadows, the flicker of distant fires painting the walls like funeral pyres. Outside, the coup gathered strength. Inside, two souls defied a galaxy's weight, if only for a heartbeat in the dark. The clank of boots shattered the stillness. Xander stiffened, shoving Velina behind him as the cell door hissed open. A figure stepped through, cloaked in shadow, weapon gleaming like liquid night. Xander tensed for the killing blow until the voice came low and urgent. "Easy, diplomat," said Captain Krav, eyes like molten gold under the hood. Behind him, another shape emerged, scales glinting with iridescence. "Thalia, you want to live?" Krav growled, tossing Xander a small device that deactivated the shackles with a sharp snap. "Then move, now." Velina staggered upright as Thalia tore the control collar from her throat with a hiss of sparking circuits. "Your Majesty," she said, breathless, "the Loyalists are rallying. Malik doesn't have the numbers, he thinks." Velina's eyes burned violet fire once more as she straightened to her full height, regal even in rags. "Then we finish this before dawn." Xander's pulse thundered as he followed them into the shadows of the corridor, the taste of her kiss still lingering like a promise he refused to break. Whatever came next, blood, fire, death, he would meet it at her side, because some wars were worth everything. Asterisk, the air beyond the cell was thick with the taste of ozone and smoke, carrying the hum of distant energy discharges that vibrated through the metal floor. Xander followed Krav and Thalia through the narrow maintenance corridors, every sense raw and stretched thin. He could still feel Velina close behind, her presence like a silent fire warming the shadows. No crown, no throne, no walls of opal light to separate her from mortality, now just a queen stripped to her essence, running for her life beside the man she was never meant to need. They burst into a junction where emergency strobes pulsed blood red, painting the alien glyphs in violent hues. Loyalist guards waited there, weapons ready, scales rippling in tension. The moment they saw Velina, they knelt in perfect synchrony, their voices a low hum of reverence. "For the crown." "For the Empire," she returned, her voice steel, wrapped in silk. It was strange, Xander thought, how she could look both shattered and unbreakable in the same breath. Regal dignity clung to her like starlight, even in torn garments and with shadows carved beneath her eyes. "Malik controls the council chamber and broadcast tower," Krav reported, his tone clipped as he checked the charge on his pulse rifle. "He plans to declare you deposed before sunrise. Execution follows." Xander stepped forward, muscles coiled tight. "Then we take the broadcast from him, and the crown." Krav gave him a look a soldier's measuring stare, weighing worth. "You've never held a Zavari weapon." Xander caught the pistol Krav tossed without hesitation, its grip humming against his palm like a living nerve. Sleek, elegant, deadly. He ran his fingers over the trigger node, instincts kicking in from 100 combat drills back on Earth. Point and shoot, right? A flicker of amusement ghosted across Krav's severe face. "Close enough." Thalia leaned in, her iridescent markings pulsing with urgency. The nobles are split. Some believe Malik's lies about contamination. Others whisper of prophecy. The crown's glow cannot be ignored. Prophecy, the word burned in Xander's mind like molten metal. He glanced at Velina, who met his gaze with violet fire steady, unyielding. No words passed, but something did. A promise. Pact sealed in silence. Move, she ordered, and they did. They wove through. Corridors alive with chaos shouts ricocheting off crystal walls. Bursts of energy fire staining the air with static. Twice they hit skirmishes. Malik's purists in ceremonial armor, their faces twisted with zeal. Krav's blade carved arcs of cobalt light through the dark, Thalia's rifle cracking like thunder. And Xander fought like a man with nothing, left to lose and everything to win. His shots worked clean at first, but desperation honed them until his aim burned precise, his movements sharp. A diplomat no longer. Not here. Not now. As they advanced, the palace revealed its wounds columns shattered, bioluminescent gardens scorched into black ruin, pools of molten glass cooling where stray blasts had kissed the walls. The Empire's beating heart was tearing itself apart, and at its core pulsed a single truth. A crown's impossible choice had unraveled centuries. Asterisk. At last, they reached the threshold of the council chamber, a pair of towering doors inlaid with silver veins, glowing faintly as if resisting Malik's desecration. Krav slammed his palm against the glyph lock. Read, denied. He's overridden. The codes, Krav hissed. Then we make our own door, Xander said, scanning the wall for weaknesses. His eyes caught the ventilation shaft above a narrow conduit, but big enough for one man. He didn't wait for permission. Boost me. Velina's brows arched, something dangerous and electric in her gaze, but she crouched, lacing her fingers. He stepped into her grip, vaulted upward, and wrenched the grate free. Metal screamed as he dragged himself into the shaft, the alien alloy burning his palms. He crawled fast, heart pounding in his ears, until faint voices reached him, echoing through the vent like ghosts. The age of weakness ends now. Malik's voice thundered, rich with fanatic triumph. The people will witness purity restored. The Queen's corruption burned away in cleansing light. Xander's teeth clenched. He reached the grate above, the chamber, and peered through, and the sight below froze his blood. Malik stood before the sovereign's crown, its glow dimmed but alive, veins of silver pulsing faintly as though sensing doom. Around him, purist guards formed a circle, weapons gleaming like fangs. A holocron hovered, streaming his treason to every Zavari world. The council dais loomed behind, banners torn and trampled, and Malik held a hammer forged from ceremonial steel, its edge crackling with destructive energy. He raised it high, voice ringing with poison. This relic dies tonight, and with it, every stain of weakness. Not happening, Xander muttered. He slammed a boot into the grate, kicked it free, and dropped like a blade from heaven. He hit hard, rolled, came up firing. Blue bolts seared the air, dropping 2 guards before they turned. Chaos exploded shouts, energy fire, the holocron spinning. Wildly, Malik snarled, swinging the hammer toward Xander's skull, but the human ducked low and slammed his shoulder into the traitor's gut. They crashed against the pedestal, the crown teetering balanced on the edge of forever. Now, Xander roared. The doors blew inward in a storm of light. Krav surged through, a war beast wrapped in fury, his blade severing a guard in a spray of silver sparks. Dahlia's rifle spat death, and through the smoke came Velina, her presence cutting through chaos, like a star carving darkness. Malik lunged for the crown, but Velina was faster. She seized it, the veins of light erupting into brilliance, so fierce it burned sigils into the walls. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. The crown's radiance cascaded over her, over Xander beside her. Their silhouettes fused in incandescent fire. The guards faltered, blinded, their zeal drowned in awe. Even Malik froze, his face contorted in terror, as Valina's voice split. The chamber like thunder. "The crown has spoken," she said, violet eyes blazing like twin suns, "and its will is unbreakable." Xander turned, breath ragged, the heat of the crown's glow licking his skin. Valina's hand found his, not gently, not tentatively, but like a claim. And for the first time since this began, he understood. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was war. And they had just lit the first flame. Asterisk, the chamber was a maelstrom. Of light and fury, the sovereign's crown blazed like a newborn sun, its brilliance pouring over the obsidian walls, burning every shadow to ash. The energy rippled through the chamber in waves, throwing Malik and his zealots off balance. Xander stood at the eye of the storm, one hand locked with Valina's, the other clutching the Zavare pistol that throbbed against his palm like a living thing. Malik roared above the chaos, his voice raw with fanatic rage. "This is heresy. An empire brought low by A." His words shattered as Crave slammed into him like a thunderbolt, their weapons clashing in a scream of steel and crackling energy. Sparks arced through the chamber as Malik swung the ceremonial hammer with brutal force, narrowly missing Krav's skull and smashing a glyph-etched column into shards. Broadcast feed is still live. Thalia shouted over the din, her markings flaring as she took down another guard. "Every system is watching this." Xander's gaze darted to the hovering holocron, spinning wildly in the charged air. Billions were watching, seeing a queen, stripped of her throne, and a human branded as corruption. But that narrative was breaking, fracturing with every second. Valina stood bathed in the crown's glow, regal even in torn garments, her horns haloed in starlight. "Valina!" Xander's voice cracked like a whip through the roar of combat. "Talk to them, now, before Malik spins this into his truth." She turned, violet eyes burning, the crown blazing in her grasp like liquid fire. Slowly, deliberately, she mounted. The dais, the fractured banners beneath her feet. The light clung to her like armor, making her a silhouette of raw divinity. Even Malik faltered, his voice strangled mid-curse as the sight of her struck like a blade. "My people," she said, her voice amplified by the chamber's ancient acoustics and broadcast. "Across 1,000 stars, calm, cold, absolute. Centuries, the crown has slept. For centuries, we searched for a sign that our empire was destined for more than decay. Tonight, it woke, and in its light, I stand renewed, not broken." Gasps echoed from the nobles crowding the periphery, their jeweled crests trembling with shock. Valina lifted the crown high, its radiance spilling into the holocron, flooding every feed with blinding truth. It chose, not a Zavari, not a noble, a human, Xander of Earth, a name that will burn into history. Outrage rippled through the loyalists and traitors alike, but all threaded through it, undeniable and growing. The council's faces, projected across the feed, flickered between fury and stunned silence. Beyond them, countless worlds watched with bated breath. "This choice is not blasphemy," Valina continued, her voice cutting like a blade of light. "It is evolution. The old ways failed us. Our bloodlines rot under the weight of their own. Purity. The crown saw what pride blinded us to, that strength lies in unity, not isolation." She turned her head slightly, and the holocron captured the moment, the queen of an empire, gazing at a man in blood-streaked battle gear, his human face raw with fire and defiance. "And so I ask," she said softly, yet the words thundered. "Like destiny, will you stand with me? Not as pawn or prisoner, not as symbol, as consort, as equal, as partner. The chamber froze. The question hung between them, a blade balanced on breath. Xander felt every eye, every lens, every heartbeat in 1,000 systems pin him in place. His mind raced through shattered treaties and burning skies, through his father's ghost and his mother's laughter, through the taste of her kiss. In the dark cell, when they thought the world was ending. And then he stepped forward. The crowd gasped as he mounted the dais, boots crunching on the ruins of broken stone. His hand bloodied, trembling, stubborn closed over hers where it gripped the crown. Heat surged through him, searing and strange, as if the relic recognized the choice before his lips shaped the words. "I will," Xander said, voice steady. "As bedrock, not because your crown told me to, because I choose you." Something broke then, not in the hall, not in the feeds, but in the bones of history itself. The crown exploded in light, arcs of silver and white racing across its veins. Flaring so bright, the holocron stuttered and shield strained. The glow engulfed them both, a twin corona binding queen and human in incandescent fire. Malik screamed a raw, animal sound and lunged, his hammer raised high. No! Krav moved like lightning, his blade a cobalt arc that split the traitors. Weapon in two. The hammer crashed to the floor in molten shards. Malik fell with it, roaring curses that died as restraints clamped around his wrists. The purists broke, their zeal curdling into terror as loyalists surged to subdue them. The coup was over before dawn painted the spires. And above it all, Vaylina and Xander stood in the eye of the storm, hands entwined, the crown's dying glow casting them in light that no power in the galaxy could dim. The holocron fed the image. Into every Zavari hearth, every Earth relay, every outpost scattered among the stars. A queen crowned anew, and at her side, a human who had rewritten destiny. When silence fell, it was Vaylina who broke it, her voice soft now, yet carrying the weight of eternity. "Then let it be recorded," she said, "not as scandal, not as surrender, as the beginning of the next age." Xander met her eyes and saw it there, not just survival, not just alliance, a promise forged in fire. For the first time, the future felt real and terrifying. And his, asterisk. The fires of rebellion still smoldered when the judgment fell. Malik knelt in chains before the shattered dais, his once gleaming crest dulled with grime and fury. The council chamber rebuilt in haste hummed with tension, every noble eye fixed on the traitor who had dared to challenge the will of the crown. Vaylina stood tall in ceremonial armor that gleamed like molten silver, the sovereign's crown resting upon her brow, its glow subdued now but alive, pulsing in quiet authority. "Empire will remember your name," she said, her voice cold enough to freeze suns, "not as savior, not as reformer, as the shadow that tried and failed to eclipse the light." Malik's lip curled, but his silence was defiance enough. Vaylina lifted her hand, and 2 guards dragged him to his feet. "Exile him to the Black Reach," she ordered, the words. A blade across the chamber. "Let him rot where ambition dies and echoes carry no sound." The nobles murmured, but no one protested. The image of Malik's coup, shattered by the crown's blinding light, still haunted their minds. They had seen something no denial could erase, the relic that had slept for centuries, awakening for a human choosing him. As Malik was dragged away, Xander stood near the dais, clad in tailored garments that honored Zavari tradition, yet allowed for human ease, dark, functional, threaded with silver glyphs. He felt every stare like heat against his skin, but he didn't flinch. He'd spent his life parsing silences, navigating knives of politics. This silence felt different, less like scorn, more like surrender to a truth too immense to fight. When the chamber emptied, leaving only Vaylina, Krav, Thalia, and Xander beneath the vaulted spires, the queen removed the crown and set it gently upon the pedestal. The glow dimmed to a soft pulse, as if sleeping once more. She turned to him, her face unreadable, her horns haloed in dying light. "It's done," Xander said quietly. "For now," she replied. Her voice held the weight of galaxies. "But peace is not a proclamation, Xander. It is a blade we must sharpen every day, or it will cut us instead." He gave a wry smile. "You're saying the hard part starts now." A faint curve touched her lips. Not quite a smile, not yet. "Come," she said, and her tone softened in a way that made his chest tighten. "There is something you must see." The eternal gardens lay hushed beneath the glow of 3 moons, their pale light filtering through canopies of bioluminescent flora that pulsed in hues of violet and jade. Pools of liquid glass mirrored the sky, ripples distorting reflections into dreams. This was Velina's sanctuary, a secret heart of life in a palace forged for power. Xander walked beside her down a crystalline path, their shadows weaving through blossoms that glowed like captive stars. Here, the weight of thrones and banners fell away, leaving only a man and a queen tethered by a choice neither had sought but both had embraced. "Your archives," Xander murmured, gaze tracing the alien constellations overhead. "They hold more than history, don't they?" Velina paused beside a towering spire of glass-veined wood, its petals unfolding to reveal a cascade of light. "We uncovered records lost even to legend," she said, her voice low, as if afraid the trees might overhear. She touched a glyph, and a holofield bloomed, spinning into view between them scrolls of data, images of ships, maps of stars long dead. Xander's breath caught. Human faces stared back at him from those records clad in crude suits, standing beside Zavare figures in ancient garb, smiling, working, living. "This isn't possible," he whispered. "It is truth," Velina said. Her violet eyes burned softly as the images scrolled a colony world, half human, half Zavare children, laughing beneath alien suns. "Our species were never strangers, Xander. We were partners once. Then came war. Fear rewrote history. And unity became blasphemy." The pieces clicked like tumblers in his mind. His father's obsession with border ruins, the whispers of myths dismissed as fantasy, the dormant markers in his blood. All this time, he said hoarsely, we weren't enemies, just exiles from ourselves. Velina's hand brushed his knot by accident this time, but with intent that stole the breath from his lungs. "The crown didn't choose chaos," she murmured. "It chose restoration. It saw what we could not, that survival means becoming what we were always meant to be." Xander turned, cupping her face in his calloused hands, the glow of alien, stars dancing across her jade skin. "And let's finish what history started," he said, his voice raw, stripped of fear. Her lips parted, her breath a tremor against his own. "Together? Always." The kiss bloomed like fire under starlight, fierce and unyielding, shattering the walls of tradition as surely as Malik's coup had shattered stone. Her arms wound around his neck, his fingers tangling in her silken hair, horns grazing his temple as if crowning him in shadow and light. The world fell away, the blood, the politics, the weight of watching stars, leaving only the molten truth of 2 hearts, burning against the dark. When they broke apart, foreheads pressed together, Velina's voice was a whisper of velvet steel. "Tomorrow we tell them about the archives, the colonies, the new age." Xander smiled, a slow curve that reached his storm-bright eyes. "Tomorrow. Tonight, let me have this." They stood entwined beneath the moons, the crown's glow, flickering faintly in the distance like a sleeping god. Above them, the gardens whispered with the breath of eternity, and somewhere beyond the black, A galaxy shifted tilting toward a future neither species could have imagined. Not human. Not Zavari. Something greater. And in the hush between heartbeats, Xander knew this truth as surely as his own name. They hadn't just survived. They had rewritten the stars. Asterisk.